I've been getting this question a lot lately, so if your spiritual journey has brought you to Christianity, you might find my perspective interesting. The short answer is, 1, I think I've always been a Christian and I didn't realise it, and it might be the case for you, and I'll explain why. And 2, Christian values just work for me. Everything I've learnt so far have utility in my life and they work. So I could approach this question from many different angles, but I'm just using logical reasoning in this video. This isn't my testimony, this isn't my kind of finding Christ moment. There is a very spiritual story I could tell of how I came to Christianity, but that's very personal. I'm not sure if I want to share that yet. So this is just using logic. This is one very small argument for why I'm a Christian. So this isn't the whole picture. So if I ask you what the date is, you'd say it's the 17th of February 2025. And then you think, well, 2025 since what? Since the birth of Christ. Oh, so you're a Christian. You know, you're using the Gregorian calendar. So I just find it interesting. You might not be, but that has utility. If I set a date and I have a meeting for this specific date, that just works for pretty much everybody in the world. And even in Ethiopia, where they don't use the Gregorian calendar, it's a different year in Ethiopia. It's still based on, the year is different because they've calculated the birth of Christ differently. So it's not a completely different system. It's not like other places in the world are operating on the Mayan calendar or something. The fact that everybody uses this system and it's worked for the whole world, with minor exceptions, is interesting to me. Oh, so you're not a Christian, that's fine. But you do use that piece of technology that comes from Christianity and as a result of Christ. So that's interesting. And I found that interesting for myself. If I set a date, 2025, we all know it's 2025. So every time we consider what the date is, we are basically keeping in mind Christ. Then if you think about marriage, my brother got married. He wouldn't consider himself a Christian, so why did he get married? And it was a Christian marriage. It wasn't, because other religions celebrate marriage, but he didn't have a Hindu marriage, he didn't have a Buddhist marriage. It was basically a Christian marriage. So, oh, you're not Christian, but you're getting married. I find that interesting. Then I've got another friend who got married and christened his children. But if you ask him, he probably wouldn't say he's a Christian. So I find that interesting, that people get their children christened and not actually Christian, or don't consider themselves Christian. Now you probably think, oh well, they shouldn't do that, but that's besides the point. It's something that people do. And then if you think, when you're ill, do you go to the hospital? I've recently learned that hospitals and universities are kind of like a Christian invention, if you like. They came out of monasteries because there was infrastructure and funding in place, and it aligns with Christian values of helping the sick and education. So when you're ill, do you just meditate and have non-attachment associated with the situation, or do you go to hospital? Because if you go to hospital, that's basically a Christian idea. That's a Christian invention. When you want to learn something, did you go to university? So you ask people, oh yeah, I went to uni. I'm just going to the hospital. Like, these are things that we take for granted, and we all do them. So most people get married, go to uni, go to the hospital when they're sick. They use the Gregorian calendar to set the date. So a lot of those are Christian inventions. This is just logic. Again, this isn't spiritual, really. Do you celebrate Christmas? I've celebrated Christmas for my whole life. My parents have celebrated Christmas as I was growing up. My brother, who doesn't consider himself Christian, celebrates Christmas. My other friend, oh, so you're Christian, without knowing it. So this is kind of the point I'm making. I asked myself all of these things. Well, I used the 2025 as the year, so I'm got Christ in mind there. When I'm ill, I seek help from a hospital, so that's a Christian value. I celebrate Christmas. You know, anybody, I wouldn't do something I don't believe in. So if I didn't consider myself a Christian, I only celebrated Christmas because it's something my parents did and I was a kid. Now unless I believed in it, I wouldn't do it. So if you're watching this and you're not a Christian, don't celebrate Christmas. Why would you? But chances are you do. And then you've got the charitable aspect of it, helping others. So I'll tell you a quick story. Me and my friend were in the car driving somewhere the other day, and there was this old boy walking, trying to cross the road, and he just face planted on the floor. It was like it went right through me the way he hit the floor. And that feeling speaks of itself. Like, I'm not him. I shouldn't feel that guy's pain. But when he hit the floor, me and my mate both was like, oh. Straight away, there was so he's in the road. There's a scaffold lorry driving down. Straight away, a woman that was waiting for the bus opposite walked over to help him. The scaffold guys stopped to help. Like, you're an autonomous person and you don't have to help people. They're not your responsibility. But no sane person would let that person just lay on the floor. You're not just going to sit there and wait for your bus. You do it out of, it's just natural. It would be very difficult. You've got to be a proper psychopath, or it would be very difficult for you to just watch that bloke laid face down on the floor. When your bus turns up, carry on. Do you know what I mean? But in that moment, that woman's walked across, helped him across the road. The scaffold lorries made sure they're all right. The car behind has got flashing beacons on. They must have been some sort of a recovery vehicle. So they've pulled up and got out. And then they've obviously phoned an ambulance, because we noticed that a lot of people were helping him. Otherwise we would have helped. We've carried on our journey, and then an ambulance has driven past, obviously with that guy in it. So that whole thing was they're all Christian values. The charitable thing of helping the guy, then the ambulance driving him to hospital, which was a Christian invention anyway. So I'm oversimplifying the argument, but this is just a picture that was built up in my mind. So there are some commonplace things that we use that I would attribute to Christianity. Then you think about the actual teachings of Christianity. If you just think of the 10 Commandments, I happen to agree with them. This is why it wasn't much of a stretch for me to just go, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. So the first commandment, no other gods than me. I only believe in one God anyway. If God created everything, you don't need multiple gods. So if you think you found the right God, the true God, that's easy to follow that teaching. No false idols. I struggle to idolize people like celebrities. I know some people really like their favorite band. They'll go to festivals and want to get to the front row. That's never been me. I had a job where I was a cameraman for like festivals where you operate the camera and it goes on the big screens. So I had access to some quite famous people. And I remember my manager at the time was like, oh, that's, certain people like the Kaiser Chiefs, Ellie Goulding, a few different, big names. They're not really big names anymore, I wouldn't have thought. But they're like, oh, do you want to get their autograph? And no, I've never been interested in that. I know some people are. So false idols, I can agree with that. Respect God's name, so don't take the Lord's name in vain. I mean, I wouldn't go out of my way to speak bad about anybody I respect, so why would I do that about God? So that just makes sense. Keep the Sabbath day holy. I think in our culture, it's quite easy to work all the time and fall for the grind mentality. And I think there's a lot of utility in keeping the Sabbath day holy, whether that's Saturday or Sunday. I know there's controversy. Someone's going to tell me we changed it or whatever. But one day a week, having rest, adds rhythm to the week. So if you think about seasons, you've got summer and winter. If it was summer all the time and it was just constantly hot, everything would get burned. You need the winter time to cool everything down, and it's just the rhythm of life. So if you work all the time, you're going to get burnt out. So that has utility as a teaching. Bo here? So I agree with that. Number 5, honour your parents. Your parents are who brought you into this life, and they provide for you for the most part. I know some people have bad upbringings and their parents aren't great. I was very fortunate that I have a good relationship with my parents, and I think that's important. So I can agree with that. Do not murder. You're an autonomous person that can basically do what you want. If you woke up in the morning and decided that, I'm not going to say certain words because I don't want YouTube to, take this video down, but if you wanted to unalive somebody, if that was just your desire for the day, if that was your desire for the day, you could just do that. There are consequences, but sometimes if you have a goal in mind, you're willing to do whatever it takes. So you would go to prison, but you'll get fed, you'll live the rest of your life, but you get to do that thing. But most people, me included, don't want to do that. That's just not a natural thing for you to wake up and go, oh, I'd really like to take somebody's life. So easy, that's very easy to agree with that one. Do not commit adultery and be faithful to your spouse. It's obvious why that has utility in a relationship. You want to be able to trust somebody. If you are unfaithful, that's going to have negative implications, so that just makes sense. Like, so far, nothing about Christianity, there's nothing that doesn't make sense to me yet, so I guess I'm a Christian. This is the thought process. Do not steal. If you just think logically about that, if you have something, like my dog, this is my biggest fear with my dog. I've never worried about it before. I don't know why with Bo it's different, but like, I used to take my other dogs and like tie their lead up outside a shop and be happy to go in and come out. But with Bo, I just love her so much. It's not like I loved my other dogs less, but I worry about somebody taking her because she's very friendly and she would just go with anyone, I think. But so think about that logically. If you have something like I have my dog, if somebody took it from me, I wouldn't be very happy about that. So why would I take something from somebody else? Just obvious, just makes sense. Do not lie. I have quite a strong opinion about lying, and I can be very honest naturally. Like, I know some people, they find it quite easy to lie. I don't think lying ever works out because you get caught out in the end. It's called a story gap, when the story you tell people is different to what the truth is. But I think you can actually manipulate reality in quite a profound way by lying. If you tell somebody a lie that's quite significant, that can change their whole reality. Like, you could tell somebody something that isn't true that would make them want to end their life. That's quite significant, and that would be on your hands. So lying, whether it's a white lie or something more significant, doesn't make any sense, or it makes sense to avoid it. So I agree with that one. Do not covet. So don't want something that somebody else has got. We know with social media that comparison is the quickest way, like comparing yourself to others, comparing your life to others is the quickest way of making yourself feel bad about your own life. So again, that just seems like sound advice. So the picture's building up. I just thought logically about all these things. I'm basically already a Christian. And then you think about the deadly sins. I won't go through all of them, but because some sins are more important than others. But I struggled with being overweight for a very long time. And that was gluttony. The opposite of gluttony is moderation and temperance. And that is what solved my problem. Through temperance, I was able to get my weight under control, and it had a positive impact on my life. And you can go through the other sins, but if you have a sin that's a problem, like you might have a problem with sloth or lust or wrath, anger, the opposite, the 7 heavenly virtues, will solve your problem. Like, it just has utility. So I don't want to make this video too long, and I don't want to brush over things, but I could talk about this for about 3 hours. But I was building a picture in my mind where I already had a lot of Christian values. Society, the Western society that I live in, is built around Christian values. A lot of the societal technologies, like hospital, university, charity, the fact that charity is a thing. And I know other religions include a lot of the same teachings, but it seems quite specific to Christianity. Like, we use the Gregorian calendar, it's not another religion's calendar. Do you know what I mean? So that's the picture. So Christian from a logical kind of I'm already a Christian and it works for me standpoint, that's why I come to Christianity. Now, one final thing actually, I really enjoy listening to Alan Watts' lectures. Alan Watts is an English philosopher that started off in the Anglican Church from a very young age and then went into more Taoism and Buddhism and Eastern philosophies. And I've listened to probably thousands of hours of that guy's lectures. He's got a great voice and he's very interesting, and a lot of what he says makes sense. And he can talk very well about Eastern philosophy and Christianity. But the detriment for him, I think, he started off from a young age in the Christian church. I'm quite lucky that nobody told me I had to go to church, because normally you resist against like what your parents tell you to do. So the fact that nobody told me I had to go to church, I'm open to the idea of going. But Alan Watts, I look at the fruits of his life, and some of the circumstances surrounding him are quite questionable. I really respect him. I think he's enlightened. He's a very interesting guy. But the circumstances surrounding his death were a bit questionable. And he died basically an alcoholic. I think he was a heavy smoker, an alcoholic. He had multiple wives, lots of kids from different women, and whatever philosophy he adopted wasn't working for him. If you look at, I'd never met the guy, I can't claim to know how his life was going, but if you look at some of the later interviews, because he was on interviews and did a lot of radio shows and stuff, it wasn't working for him. His philosophy didn't work. But maybe if he'd kept to the Christian values, his life would have been different. And that was something that helped me make the decision, because I'd adopted some of the Buddhist or Taoist kind of teachings, but the Christian teachings worked a lot better in my life. So I could go on and compare it to Buddhism and different religions, but that's the kind of logical thinking of it. Then you think, okay, right, I'm sold on Christianity. But then you've got all these denominations. Which denomination do I choose? So I think of it like this. Imagine a Bible on a coffee table. That is the Word of God. That's Christianity. That is Christ. That's the story of Christ in the Bible. That's Christianity in its purest form. And I know you've got your purists on here that will say you don't need to be a Catholic or whatever. So that's Christianity. The problem is, I probably would misinterpret that book. So I'm not smart enough to just get it straight away. Or you'd have to read it about 100 times. So that's Christianity in its purest form, the Word of God, fine. I've always been of the opinion, if I want to learn something, I just want to learn from the people that are best at it. I look at the best person in that field and then tell them to tell me what to do. So if you're going to be a Christian, you want to be like the most legit Christian there is. So I tried to figure out what's the most legit denomination. And this is the conclusion I come to. And I might be wrong. You might have your own opinions, that's fine. But from what I understand, the Catholic, if you take different denominations, they all have founders. So the Protestant church, the founder is Martin Luther. The Anglican church, the founder is King Henry VIII. Presbyterianism, John Knox. Methodism, John Wesley. Baptist, John Smith. Jehovah's Witness, Charles Russell. So these are all denominations created by people, whereas the Catholic Church was created by Jesus. So to me, that seems like the one to go for, because people have their own interests. Just to give you the obvious example, the Anglican Church was created because Henry VIII didn't like the rules surrounding marriage, so he just created his own church. Why would I follow? That's common knowledge. You know, he literally just didn't like the rules, so he just created his own church because he was powerful enough to do so. So I don't see why you would, subscribe to that idea. So you might disagree that the Catholic church was created by Jesus, but this is the bit of scripture that would kind of suggest that this is true, and this can be interpreted in different ways. I don't claim to have all the answers. Matthew chapter 16 verse 18 to 19. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So, as far as I can tell, the Catholics interpret this as Jesus is instating Peter, Apostle Peter, as the first pope. You, on this rock, I will build my church. So that makes sense. If you're Jesus and you know you're not going to be around forever, you instate somebody to uphold the church for you. So that's the first pope. And then that can create a lineage of people that always are on earth to uphold the church. I hope this makes sense. Now, some people interpret this, and on this rock I will build my church. So some people say he wasn't instating Peter as the first pope, but he was saying himself, Jesus, on this rock I will build my church. So he was sort of like dissing Peter, as far as I can tell from other. This is like the argument against the Catholic Church. So I subscribe to the idea that Jesus instated Peter as the first pope, and he has given him authority to create the church. So that is the denomination I chose, was Catholicism. I'm struggling to get this point across because I just know that there's a lot of arguments that are going to come my way in the comments, but this is very deep. You know, it'd have to be a few hours just to get into it, but that is why I chose Catholicism. If I want to be a Christian, I want to be a follower of Christ. I don't want to be a follower of King Henry VIII or Martin Luther or fallible humans that have their own desires, their own issues, and they're not even saints. King Henry VIII isn't a saint as far as I know, so why would I subscribe to his denomination? So I hope I've made this point, and I hope my perspective kind of gives you something to think about. I'm not going to choose a denomination lightly. There has to be reasons why I would choose that denomination, and there seems to be flaws to my logical reasoning why these other denominations, would be the best choice. So I hope that helps. I don't really have an actionable step. I'd be interested to know what denomination you've chose if you are a Christian, and why. Hope that helps. Speak to you soon.